Morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the monthly meeting of Atheists United here at the Center for Inquiry. Okay, for those of you that don't know me, my name is John Nelson. Bobby Kurthart and I are co-presidents of the organization. And Atheists United has two purposes, one of which is the promotion of atheism, primarily through education, and the other one is the principle of upholding separation between religion and government.
For the good speech you're going to hear, and for all of the other work and wisdom and insight and dedication Herb Silverman brings to free thought, let's welcome Herb Silverman.
Is this the right level of speaking?
Good enough.
Good enough. Okay, thanks very much for inviting me in that overly flattering introduction. And it's going to be probably a longer talk than my political career lasted in it, but it was, in a manner of speaking, something that did last a long time, and it's going to sound a little bit like a soap opera. That my story began in 1990 when I decided to run for governor of South Carolina. Now, one might ask that why would a liberal Yankee atheist Jew with 4 strikes against them going in decide to seek the highest office in South Carolina? Well, a colleague of mine at the College of Charleston, where I teach, pointed out to me that our state constitution prohibited atheists from holding the office of governor. So I went to the ACLU thinking that once I pointed out this obviously unconstitutional portion, that it would be overturned. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. The ACLU said that they needed a plaintiff, and that they would like me, as an atheist, to run for governor. So I had never held any political office, and I thought, in my political naivete at the time, okay, I guess all I have to do is declare for office, and they'll recognize, of course, our Constitution needs to be changed, and that'll be it. Well, as I said, I wasn't part of this free thought movement and was pretty naive at that time. It wasn't quite that easy. What happened is I found out that the word atheist was a pretty sexy word. The public picked it up. There was an Associated Press article about this, and the first call I got when it started getting some publicity was from my mother, who read about this in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now, I didn't want to tell her because I knew how worried she'd be about this sort of thing, because she's worried about all this shenanigans I've done in my life, and I figured they would never get outside of South Carolina. And I had to admit to my mother that reading in the Philadelphia Inquirer was not the way to find out that I was running for the office of governor, and that I was an atheist. So that was actually the first political fence that I had to mend. Meanwhile, Governor Campbell, the Republican governor of South Carolina at the time, said that our South Carolina Constitution was just fine as it is, because our nation was founded on godly principles. But then I started getting some invitations to appear on radio talk shows, and one of the first shows I was on, a caller said, well, since you're an atheist, I guess you're free to go out and murder and rape and commit whatever atrocities you think you can get away with. And that shocked me when I heard that. My response was, well, with an attitude like that, I hope you keep your belief in your God. Yeah, and I recognized around that time that I wanted to do more than just change the Constitution, that I was also interested in changing some of the hearts and minds of my fellow South Carolinians. You know, I tried to be nice on some of these shows, you know, when the media contacted me, but you know, invariably I was introduced as a so-called atheist or an admitted atheist. They even asked me in one of these shows that, would you introduce one of your guests as a so-called Baptist or an admitted Catholic? Well, maybe today you might. But there were also opportunities to go throughout the state. They had these various Meet the Candidates nights where I would be there with, sometimes it was candidates for all the offices, sometimes for just governor. One that was quite memorable was in Greenville, South Carolina. I live in Charleston, which is the liberal part of a very conservative state. Greenville, for those of you who know, you have Bob Jones University. It's a very fundamentalist region. So Sharon and I went up and I spoke there, along with candidates for a variety of offices. Since the highest office was governor, you know, we were on last. But it was, you know, really a shock to hear what some of the other candidates were saying initially. Like one candidate accused another candidate of attending the wrong church. And there was a candidate who also got up and then asked his wife and children to also stand during his presentation, just to show he had good family values. Had I known, I might have asked Sharon to bring our cats so she could hold them up during my presentation. But I gave my talk, and it was about civil rights and why atheists should have the right to run. And after that, you know, there was pretty much silence, and we were supposed to then, we had our little you know, snacks afterward where people could come up to the candidates. Well, Sharon and I were pretty much off in the corner, and nobody was talking to us. There were a couple of people staring over. But then as I was about to leave, near the end, there was somebody who looked around, so nobody was there, came up to me and said, you know, I'm a principal at a high school here, and I think you're very brave for what you're doing, and then quickly ran away. Yeah, and I did have an opportunity to be on PBS on a statewide debate with the gubernatorial candidates. Governor Campbell, who had an easy re-election, didn't bother to attend. But I was on with the other candidates. There was a Democratic Party candidate and an American Party candidate. The American Party, for those who don't know, is the old George Wallace Party. So, enough said. And in the debate, I actually, in addition to my civil rights issue of atheists should be allowed to run for governor, brought up other issues in the campaign that are actually much more relevant today than then. I talked about campaign finance reform, that South Carolina should have a lottery to help education. And I was also the first candidate to talk about taking the Confederate flag off the state capitol. Now, as is often the case, my friends thought that I had won a debate, but I expect others felt the same about their candidates. But there was actually an objective way to determine who won the debate, because a year later, I was the only one of the three candidates who was not in jail. Despite how they were questioning my ethical standards. The American Party candidate was in jail because he refused to get a driver's license. He was kind of like a militia type who said, the government should not tell us what to do in any way. The Democratic candidate was in jail for more traditional reasons, for tax evasion. Now, prior to this, I had not been a public speaker, other than just teaching my math classes. But I did get used to the kinds of questions that I would be asked, so I had some reasonable answers for them. I'll just give you a brief sampling. Like one of the first questions typically asked was, what do I think are my chances of winning? And I said, look, I'm an atheist, I'm not a fool. I wanted to show that we were honest, and I was certainly free to be honest, because it wasn't like I thought I had any chance of winning my campaign. And sometimes they'd even say, well, why should I just bother voting for you? And I quoted Eugene V. Debs, I also said that on PBS, who said, it's better to vote for someone you want and not get it than for someone you don't want and get it. I was also asked, what would be the first thing that I would do if I were elected? I said, well, demand a recount. Because, among other things, I heard a lot on the radio, why are you atheists so angry? Don't you have any sense of humor? I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it's one of the many stereotypes. So I at least wanted to show that, yes, we do have a sense of humor. So we are angry about some of the laws in this country, and we'd like to see them change, but it helps, I think, just to have people get to know, even on a one-to-one basis, that we're atheists and we're reasonable people. One question that I would as often ask, from those who would want to convert me, what would make you believe in God? Now that's actually an interesting theological question, I suppose. What kind of evidence? My answer was, well, maybe if I won the election. Now that would be a real miracle. From a lot of worried Christians that typically get, well, what do you think will happen to you when you die? And I said, well, I know exactly what's going to happen to me when I die. I'm going to do what my Jewish mother always wanted me to do. I'm going to medical school. I want to use my body parts to its fullest while I'm alive, but afterward I hope somebody else can make use of them. Now, if the law were changed, I was asked, do I think that an atheist would be elected in South Carolina? And I answered honestly, not in the immediate future, just like 30 years earlier, no blacks could get elected in South Carolina, but that's changed. And I pointed out that this was a civil rights issue where we should be measured more on how we treat others than on what our theology was. And in fact, people could run for governor and say that blacks are inferior and should all be shipped back to Africa, or that women should stay in the home and not go out and work, and still be able to run for governor. And in fact, I pointed out that some previous governors had taken those kinds of positions in South Carolina. But all I'm saying is that we should treat our fellow human beings kindly, and I just happen to not believe in a deity, and for that I'm not allowed to be eligible for the office. I was also asked, when was this belief in a supreme being made a requirement in our state constitution? And that actually happened at the Constitutional Convention of 1868. It was actually a liberal change, because at that time only white Protestant landowners were allowed to hold public office. When that was actually discussed about changing it, the Constitution, one delegate said, well, what's going to happen if some candidate simply pretends to believe and really doesn't? And another delegate answered honestly, basically, well, we can't do anything about that, but that this law was meant to exclude from public office any man so depraved as to openly deny belief in the Supreme Being. Well, I fit that category. And even the head of the Election Commission said that I would not have been questioned about my religious beliefs if I had just kept quiet about them. Well, and my response then was, you mean I should have lied? Don't you think there's enough hypocrisy with our politicians today? And where some of them would probably say that they believed in the tooth fairy if it would help them get elected. Now, some of my friends also asked me, why would I waste so much time on something so trivial? Well, I actually had two answers. The first answer was I didn't know it would take as much time as it did. But the other answer also was that I really did find it appalling to be ineligible simply because of my religious beliefs, and to challenge the law that gives credibility to religious intolerance and bigotry is not frivolous. Well, I did have my day in court. It was the U.S. District Court of South Carolina, where the judge, who had recently been appointed on the recommendation of Strom Thurmond, our senator, ruled that the case was not ripe, that only if I won the election would he rule on the merits of the case. For obvious reasons, he wanted to sidestep it. Well, to the surprise of no one, I lost the gubernatorial election. But being a positive kind of a person, I started thinking, well, what are the good things that came out of this campaign? Well, education is good, and I certainly got to know the Bible Belt very well. And initially, I was worried that I might somehow hurt atheism by going around and making statements, knowing that some people would only know atheism from me. But I then found out that the reputation that atheism had to begin with in South Carolina, it would be really hard to hurt atheism. I remember one time I was at my dentist, and he said, after reading an article about me in the paper, I'm surprised to find out you're an atheist. You always seem like such a nice fellow. Well, one principle that I have is never argue with somebody who has a drill in your mouth. but afterward, I did talk to him a little and explain my point of view, and he came around, not to become an atheist, but to recognize that we can be very reasonable people, and we should not judge purely based on our belief in a deity. I, of course, got plenty of hate mail during the campaign, but the surprise that I got in the mail was not so much the hate mail, which I expected, but well-meaning people who were just ignorant about what my views were. Like, for instance, I would very often get some pamphlet or just a saying I am the way, the truth, and the light, or something, thinking that, gee, they might think, I would say that, gee, I never thought of that before. Well, now I'm a believer. and several people would invariably say, well, if you're an atheist, I guess that means you believe in Satan, because you have to believe in something. And then I have to explain, no, the only people who believe in Satan seem to be Christians. And we don't need our exorcisms or things. Satan never bothers us if you don't believe in him. I also heard from a lot of non-believers in South Carolina who would call or write, and almost to a person they would say, I'm really happy to see you're here doing this, because I thought I was the only one in the whole state who felt that way. Well, I started collecting these names, and eventually we started an organization, the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, who are also part of the Atheist Alliance, and we've been a vibrant organization ever since. We also started on my campus at the College of Charleston a student organization called the Atheists Humanist Alliance, and they're very brave and looking for a sense of community in South Carolina. But I must say, for me, the best personally during my campaign was that I met Sharon, and we've been together ever since. Actually, we met in church. It was the Unitarian Church, which was the only church during the campaign that invited me to speak, and Sharon offered to then work on my campaign, and quickly moved up the ladder to my inner circle. And she tried to get me invitations to other churches and places, but it was not easy. So when I lost the campaign, I blamed her. But we've gotten along very well despite our religious differences. You see, I'm an atheist and Sharon was an agnostic. But despite these differences, as far as I could tell, there's never been a non-verbal war between atheists and agnostics. And since then, though, Sharon has been born again. She's now a full-fledged atheist. But at that time, then, I had politics in my blood, and I didn't know what to do after losing the election. So what do I do after trying to become governor? Well, I figured this was the time to try to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a notary public. Actually, I found out from my ACLU lawyer that there was another provision in the state constitution that not only was I ineligible for the office of governor, I could not hold any public office. And I knew at that time I couldn't win an election for dog catcher in South Carolina, but notary public was the only office that you didn't have to run to become a notary. And that would, if they granted me the notary, change our state constitution. So in 1991, my lawyer suggested that I do the notary, especially since an essentially identical provision in Maryland in 1961, the Turcaso case that a lot of you are familiar with, was ruled by the Supreme Court that you could not have the religious test for office. Well, my campaign for notary was not shorter as I thought it would be. Because all I did was first fill out the form and send in my $25 fee, which is typically what you need to do to become a notary in South Carolina. But I also crossed out the "So Help Me God" and pointed out that our U.S. Constitution prohibits religious tests, so they wouldn't just ignore that part, and they'd have to recognize that granting me the notary would change our Constitution. Well, my application was returned by the Secretary of State because I hadn't filled out the form properly, because I crossed out a portion, even though it was within my rights. And ultimately, the decision is the governor's on who is granted the notary. So we sent my notary application back to the governor, and then he too rejected. And we tried to find out why he rejected, and his office said that, look, it's too burdensome to give reasons for all the people we reject as notary publics. Well, after a couple more years, we finally got a deposition from the Secretary of State in 1994 and found out in that period of time they had 33,471 notaries approved, and that I was the only one rejected, which didn't seem all that burdensome. And as far as I know, I'm the only person in the history of South Carolina to be rejected as a notary public. But we actually wanted a deposition from Governor Campbell, where he would have had to testify under oath about the reasons for rejecting me. And he couldn't just come out and say, well, we don't believe in the U.S. Constitution about religious tests, but he tried to avoid, as much as possible, getting a deposition. Until finally we got help from a very unlikely source. My lawyer argued successfully in the circuit court that if President Clinton could be deposed by the lawyers of Paula Corbin Jones, you remember her from the Monica case, then so could the former Governor Campbell be deposed. And the judge ruled in our favor, and we did get a deposition from the governor. And this was in 1995. There was an 86-page deposition. Yeah, now I'm not going to give you that whole deposition, although it was quite amusing. But let me just give you a brief excerpt so you can see the flavor of it. The questions are from my ACLU attorney. Isn't it a fact that you have stated publicly that you do support the religious qualification in the state constitution? Answer. I have a belief in God myself. Yes, sir. Question. That wasn't the question. Do you support having a requirement of a belief in God for public office? I swore an oath to defend the Constitution of this state and the United States, and I will stand by swearing that oath. Well, if the Constitution of this state conflicts with the Constitution of the United States, which one do you choose to defend? I swore an oath to defend both of them, and unless they are mutually exclusive, then you have no conflict. Are you aware that the United States Supreme Court in 1961, in an identical provision of the Maryland Constitution, ruled that it did conflict with the First Amendment of the United States Constitution? I have no reason to even think about that. This is an actual court case. Is it right to deny public office to people on the basis of their religious beliefs? I don't know that I can give you an accurate answer to that question. You can't or you don't want to. Now, this is the last portion, and you got to follow the reasoning carefully on why he can't answer whether he could deny office based on religious beliefs. I said, I don't know that I can because I don't know what your religious beliefs might be. I don't want to discriminate against anybody, but would it be right to have somebody running for public office that was avowed to overthrow and destroy the United States of America, and they didn't believe in a supreme being, but they believed in a foreign government, and they called that a religion? I don't know. I've never addressed that. Well, neither had I. But then there was an ironic twist in my case. My lawyer quit my case, just as at the same time that Paula Jones' lawyers quit her case. But my lawyer actually quit the entire practice of law to enter the seminary. But it wasn't like the Christian Coalition had hoped. He wasn't born again. He became a Unitarian minister and actually was going to divinity school at Harvard at the time and helped some in my case, and another ACLU lawyer took it over. But then in August of 1995, the judge in the Common Pleas Court did rule in my favor after that deposition and requested the governor to act on my application within 30 days. Well, I knew that the times were changing when a conservative publication like the Wall Street Journal, then under its winners and losers column, had winners, atheists. And then it said that Herb Silverman denied a notary license after deleting God on the application, wins a court order invalidating a South Carolina law requiring public office holders to swear belief in a supreme being. But I was not yet a true winner. Governor Campbell had resisted while in office granting me the license, and it was then up to Governor David Beasley, who was elected in 1994 with strong Christian Coalition support. he wanted creationism to be taught in our public schools, so that gives an indication. He made Governor Campbell actually look like a real liberal. And at that time, the Secretary of State advised Governor Beasley to deny me the notary, and the reason was that the Secretary of State says, quote, "because I'm a Christian," and that was reason enough. So, unwilling to go quietly, Governor Beasley then appealed that decision to the South Carolina Supreme Court. And a headline in the Charleston Post and Courier on October 31st of 1995 said, quote, "Governor David Beasley wants the South Carolina Supreme Court to decide if office seekers should be forced to believe in a supreme being." My response was, I understood how I could be forced to say I believe. For instance, torture would work. but Governor Beasley did not clarify how I could actually be forced to believe. And the point I was trying to make here, as this being a civil rights case, some more sympathetic people said, look, you know, blacks and gays have no choice in their color or sexual orientation, but you have a choice. And I pointed out, no, I didn't. It was not a matter of choice for me, that my reasoning abilities, based on observation, experience, discussion, and readings, left me with no choice. I can pretend to believe in a deity, but can't truly believe extraordinary claims when there's not a scintilla of evidence, any more than I can change my skin color or sexual orientation. And in fact, I think this was effective when I talked to religionists this way, when I would say to them, look, do you have a choice? You know, I know you have a deep belief in Jesus. Could you just suddenly say, I make a choice to stop believing? You might still feel like you're going to be in trouble in the afterlife, but you couldn't just say, I don't believe and now I'm an atheist. And they agreed with that and understood a little better, I think. But aside from changing the Constitution, the main point at this time that I was trying to convey was that reasonable people can disagree about whether there's a God, much like we can disagree about whether the universe is continuing to expand or whether eventually it'll start to contract again. That these may be interesting philosophical issues, but what's important is how we treat each other, regardless of our theological beliefs. That our dogma should never be more important than our compassion for others. And this was essentially an important part of my campaign at that point. Well, the South Carolina Supreme Court heard the case in October of 1996. In interviews, I couldn't resist pointing out that I was qualified to be a professor of mathematics at the College of Charleston, a state institution, but that I lacked the ethics and moral standards for notary public. And that perhaps this valuing of religious indoctrination over reason and scientific inquiry might help explain the dismal condition of education in South Carolina, where in the SATs we're 50th out of 50 states. In April of 1997, with these court cases just kept going on. Remember, the notary case started in 1991. With a ruling still pending, there was an article in the local paper about the case, and I was interviewed and was asked what I thought Governor Beasley hoped to accomplish by excluding me as a notary public. And I said, Governor Beasley knows that the U.S. Constitution prohibits religious tests for public office, but by trying to exclude non-believers, I think he's simply playing to the religious bigotry of a segment of his constituency. And in fact, I had heard informally from his own lawyers that that's what it was all about, which was not a surprise. Well, Governor Beasley's press secretary responded that the governor, quote, denies in the strongest terms that he is a religious bigot and thinks it's a shame that Silverman would attack the governor's religious beliefs like that. Apparently, Governor Beasley couldn't distinguish between being called a religious bigot and a political panderer, which is what I called him. And he reacted as if I were trying to prevent Christians from holding public office. Well, then, in May of 1997, finally, the South Carolina Supreme Court unanimously agreed that the South Carolina Constitution violates the religious test clause of the U.S. Constitution. Still not quite over. Because in the newspaper the next day I shared top billing with a person whose lawsuit paved the way for our deposing Governor Campbell. There were two side-by-side headlines in the Charleston Post and Courier. Atheist wins fight against God clause, and High Court says Jones is cleared to sue Clinton. My picture appeared next to Paul's, but it was easy to tell us apart. But still, for Governor Beasley, he had a tough call. He didn't want to be the first governor of South Carolina to grant a notary commission to an acknowledged atheist. But on the other hand, they were somewhat reluctant to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court for a couple of reasons. First, all along they had been arguing the states' rights issue, saying that he was sworn to uphold the state constitution without regard to previous U.S. Supreme Court decisions. So how could he then ask the federal government to interfere with unanimous decision of the highest court in the sovereign state of South Carolina? But also, at that time they had wasted countless money on a couple of other issues, like keep trying to keep women out of the Citadel, which is also in Charleston, and they lost that case, as you know. And also, they were in litigation about posting the Ten Commandments in the Charleston County Council, and they lost a lot of money on that one, too. So then conservative state officials probably did not want to be criticized for wasting even more taxpayer dollars on what would obviously be another costly and fruitless appeal of my case. They had already wasted more than $100,000, to try to prevent me from being a notary public. And as you know, South Carolina is not one of the richest states in the country. So finally, on August 8th, 1997, Governor Beasley granted me my notary commission. So then I went from being a mild-mannered math professor to, and just a minute here. From mild-mannered professor to notary man.
Herb? Thank you.
So, we were really excited with this victory, and Sharon and I went down to the county clerk to pick up my notary commission. And Sharon, like some of you, were taking pictures of this momentous event. And I don't know what your definition of loser is, but this clerk behind the desk had no clue what was going on with all these pictures, and she probably thought, well, here's the guy's happiest moment in his life when he gets a notary commission. But I'm open for business, and I have a notary public sign posted prominently in my campus office. And recently, a student of mine at the College of Charleston, who was unfamiliar with my case, saw the notary sign and asked if I had to go to law school to become a notary. I told him it wasn't quite that simple. Law school would have only taken 3 years. It took longer for me to get my notary commission than my PhD in mathematics. Now, my right to become a notary certainly should not have taken 7 years or happened the way it did, but I could tell you it was well worth the wait. And now, in closing, I have a special offer for all of you here, as well as for your children or grandchildren. South Carolina is one of 3 states in the country where notary publics are allowed to perform weddings. So if you or any of your relatives want to get married in South Carolina, not only will I perform a free ceremony, but Sharon and I have an extra bedroom which will turn into a honeymoon suite. Thank you.
Before we go to questions and answers, one thing I would like to do is tell you that we have expenses just like anybody else has expenses, and so anybody that is so inclined, we would encourage you to help us with our expenses, and we have our baskets that we pass around somewhere back there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. And gosh, that was what can you say about that? I'm looking forward to seeing that one again on video. Well, let's have a question and answer period. Without any further ado, let's bring up South Carolina's most notable and public notary public.
Should I? Do you want to go?
Yeah.
Feel free.
Okay, Fred.
Have you, really delightful, have you encouraged anyone else to follow your odyssey by checking the state laws of other states to see whether others' legal odysseys like yours can be advanced?
Yeah, we did check, and I think there were a couple other states that had similar rules in the book. Like Margaret Downey, who's speaking here in a couple weeks, found out in Pennsylvania they had that same provision, and she thought, well, maybe they'd start something there, but when she called, they acted the way I expected it to be done in South Carolina. They said, oh, of course, that no longer applies, so yeah, sure, you can be a notary. So I think South Carolina was the only state that really took this seriously. But since then, there have been other atheists in South Carolina who were notary publics. In fact, Sharon and I at the time were living together, and then we decided to get married after 10 years of living together. And a friend of ours who was an atheist and was not a notary said, well, I'll perform the ceremony if you certify me as a notary. So I signed the form for him, and he became a notary and performed our ceremony. So we're getting a lot of publicity now.
I'm curious as to what kind of vote you did get for governor. How many people did vote for you?
Well, that was actually kind of hard to tell because I was a write-in candidate.
Oh.
And what happened, sometimes they just threw out write-in votes. Other times they just lumped all of them in precincts together. So I was in there with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And I had trouble voting for myself because I said I wanted to have a write-in, and they said, well, we don't have a pencil or anything for that. So I had to borrow from somebody in line so I could vote for myself. If they knew why I wanted to borrow a pencil, they might not have lent it to me. But overall, I think I had about 350 certified votes, but it wasn't enough to win.
Ed, with your hand up?
I did, but I thought I might go to John first. The other thing is, did you get any papers read out as to the public opinions on these issues?
Well,
I mean, they have polls.
Yeah, there were some television polls about whether atheists should be allowed to hold public office. And at that time, it was probably, I think, around 70 to 30 against. But, this is people who call in television stations. I don't know if they're representatives of the state. I think it's coming more to the point, and we've gotten some very favorable publicity in South Carolina. Like I have an article in our local paper that was printed recently about our group, and the headline is "Life Without God, Atheists Say Morality and Good Works Guide Their Lives." So I think now, even for those who aren't atheists, they're saying, yes, atheists can be reasonable people. And that's really the issue that we're hoping for. We're not trying to convert the whole state.
Hello.
What's the attitude of your college administration towards all this?
Well, we do have academic freedom, so I haven't, all that I was asked initially that I kept to is, when you're out promoting your views, make sure you don't indicate that the College of Charleston supports this in any way, that I'm free to do things on my own. I know that people called and say, well, I'm not giving anymore, or why do you allow an atheist to teach at the College of Charleston? And sometimes they would probably say, well, we didn't know, or we have to do it, but I wasn't personally hassled by it. And in fact, sometimes people would call me brave or courageous for doing this, and I would say, no, I'm protected. I'm a tenured faculty member. To me, the people who are brave and courageous would be maybe accountants or bankers or gas station owners who come out where they would lose business, and that we're trying to pave the way of making atheism more respectable so that they could come out of their closets.
John?
Yeah, I just wondered, did that court case then overturn that provision of the state constitution, so that's no longer in the state constitution?
Well, what happened, it's still in the state constitution because they haven't revised it again, but it's all on record that you can't use that anymore. And in fact, just recently, South Carolina voted on their old miscegenation laws, where blacks and whites can't intermarry. The courts had ruled many decades earlier, but to get it off the books, they had to have a referendum. So South Carolina voted on whether to get it off, and it passed to get it off, but it was something like 55 to 45. So.
But that means somebody could now run for governor.
Yes, and there's no South Carolina challenge. Now, the next step is to have people openly be atheist and win a public office. Then it'll be a real victory.
Frank.
So what I want to know is, did you at least have a thriving notary business?
Yes, for two reasons. One, I was probably the best known notary in the state. Infamous, it would be called. But the other reason is I didn't charge anything.
Don?
When you were running for governor, did you cover the more traditional political items like taxes and roads and schools, or were your campaign strictly on civil rights and atheism and whatever?
Well, it depended. Like in some of these places, you just got a chance to speak for 3 minutes, so I would give my civil rights thing. But like for instance, in the PBS debate and other debates, you're asked questions and you have to answer. So I would bring in other issues that I was interested in, like our drug laws. I talked about that, and crime and education, talking about how much money we spend for prisons but how little for education. So I got into some of the more traditional issues, but I'd answer what was asked, and then I tried to sometimes swing it more to an issue that I cared more about.
I'm sorry, I've gone up on your name. Barbara.
I just wondered if the victory that you experienced over the atheism issue was also a victory over anti-Semitism?
Well, that's interesting because there were a lot of comments that we got that were not just anti-atheist, but there would be anti-Semitic remarks. Like one we even kept on the answering machine for about a week because it was just every kind of anti-Semitic slur was on there, and how I'm responsible for the downfall of this country, the entertainment industry, and the bank system, and all. But I think I never brought out my Judaism, but I think people recognized I was a Jew and didn't deny it. And generally what I talked about is tolerance and how we've come a long way in a state that used to only honor white Protestants, then Catholics, Jews, blacks, gays to some extent are becoming more acceptable, and this is one more civil rights issue to deal with.
What happened to the third candidate? You told us one went to jail for taxes and the other one...
You left out the Republican.
Oh, well, the Republican didn't go into the debate because he had an easy win. This was Governor Campbell, and he did win re-election. Subsequent to that, now in fact, he has Alzheimer's. And what was kind of puzzling in the current campaign for governor, the person who, the Republican candidate, has two important endorsements, and they are important in the States, both of whom from people who have Alzheimer's. There's General Westmoreland, who you probably remember from the Vietnam War. He's very far into Alzheimer's, and Governor Campbell is another one who has Alzheimer's, and they've both endorsed, and that seems to have helped the Republican candidate. To go figure.
As well as Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yes. I got here a few minutes late, but so you may have mentioned this, but did you have to pick up the tab for all this? I know it isn't cheap to go through all this.
No, actually I did not, because the ACLU does not allow anyone to pay for the case. And the ACLU did the court case, and they didn't have to pick up a tab at the end either, because they won, and they got a significant amount of money back from the state for the lawsuits. So they came out well, and I got more active within the ACLU and was on the state ACLU board. So it helped a lot of fledgling organizations build in South Carolina.
Oh yes, my dad was that strange oxymoron, a Southern atheist all his life. So, did you run into people who came out of the closet when addressing you? I think you alluded to that.
Yeah, and some of them would come out, and they're members of our organization. Some come out only in a letter to me, but I don't want any part. Like if somebody in our group who tried a little bit to say something to friends, and then it got such a negative reaction that she didn't want to say anything more. In fact, let me just read a letter I got recently. This was after a letter to the editor that I had in the paper, and the letter was about peace with tolerance. It was about the Middle East, and it's not to brag when I write the letter, because she over flatters, but she said, it's more sad to hear something like this. Dear Herb, thank you for having the courage to bring a little sanity and balance to our local Sunday school bulletin, the Post and Courier. That's our newspaper. I strongly agree with your views, but cannot voice them publicly without sacrificing my family and career. I just wanted you to know that there are many others that share your convictions and support your efforts, if only in our hearts. Please keep up the good work as a spokesperson for the rational people of America, which I'm not, but, and then again, thanks. And unfortunately, it's not signed. See, this is, and they're just people so deeply in the closet, I'm sure this person felt very brave doing this, even unsigned, but I would like to have an atmosphere where people can sign their letters and openly say who they are.
At least the paper printed that.
Yeah, well, think I'm pretty good at selling papers. That whenever I write a letter, pretty much, they're willing to print it and interview. Like I'm going to be in tomorrow's paper there. They're talking about business and religion, as businesses that advertise that we're a Christian-run business, and asked my opinion. So we're getting the message out to people. And there's a lot of hate stuff, but whenever we get some publicity, we wind up getting new members. So I think we're gradually doing better.
Jane?
Your campaign effort started basically over 10 years ago, the story you told us today.
Right.
I'm curious about changes in public opinion in South Carolina, particularly in the last year or two, with the plummeting crash of the stock market, the Enron, the scandals, the pedophilia, the Catholics, on and on, your case, the internet, and with all the media that's hitting South Carolina. Can you tell us there's been any perceivable changes in public opinion in the state in these regards?
I think that probably things are improving in South Carolina. There's more openness about, after people have come out about their non-belief, and nothing really bad has happened, and they're finding they're not alone. I think it's becoming gradually a more tolerant state, but things in South Carolina go very gradually.
Jesse Helms is retiring.
He's North Carolina. But our Strom Thurmond is retiring.
And he's out also. So
yeah, and somebody actually...
Maybe there is a God.
Wrong comment. No, and one of the people running to take his place, the Democratic candidate, is Alex Sanders, who was the president of the College of Charleston, where I was teaching, and we were interacting then. And he even spoke to our secular humanists of the Low Country group and moderated a debate that I had with the local fundamentalist minister, the most well-known, attended by 800 people. And afterward he told me he thought I won that debate easily, and he more or less said that he agrees with me, but he couldn't quite come out and say that as president of a state institution and now trying to become a senator.
RJ had his hand up.
I just wonder, this 10-year struggle that you had in that backwater state of South Carolina, did it not engender a wave of brilliant letters to the editors from atheists who are coming, daring to come out of their closets, and the letters to you encouraging and coalescing more or less this movement in South Carolina in favor of civil rights for this identity, ours?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of positive letters that I got, and I know there are some people who wrote letters to the editor that did not get them published, and because they sent a copy to me. So I think the local paper doesn't print as many letters as atheists will write. And once there was a high-profile article about me in the paper, like a full-page article where I was interviewed. They do this regularly with usually respectable people. And they got more mail on me than anyone else. And in fact, they spent one full day just having the entire letter to the editor blasting me.
You had your hand up.
I'm just curious, did you choose South Carolina, which seems like a strange choice to me to live in, because you had a professorship there, or what was the reason?
Well, two reasons. That's one, that I got a job that I wanted, talked to the people in my department, got along with them. The other is, when I was younger, I was thinking about joining the Peace Corps, and kind of always wanted to, but never quite got to it. And this, to me, seemed pretty close to it. But, I could live in a place like in the summer now. I'm living in Davis, California, where basically there are people like me. In fact, when I first ran in 1990, I was also at Davis in the summer, and somebody at the paper heard about my case when they saw it, and I was interviewed, and kind of an acute editorial. They endorsed me, the governor of South Carolina.
Sharon wants to know, did you take out the garbage?
No. I want to remind you about something. would you tell about the time that the secular humanist group that you founded volunteered to fundraise on ETV?
Okay, that would, we do good works trying to help our name, like we pick up trash, and PBS had one of these fundraising, and you see them where we go down and answer the phones for contributions, and we were wearing the shirt that I started. Oh no, it's the secular humanists of the Low Country shirt. And we're still getting some calls, but some people didn't know what it was. But they do take time to interview the person, a person from the group. And I was interviewed on the show, and they asked like what I think of ETV and what's my favorite show, and also we got to talk about our group and what we're about. And when they heard we were atheists or non-believers, then we got some quite interesting calls. Like one woman in our group, are we censored from this? Picked up the phone, and the guy on the other end said, "You fucking bitch," and went on from there. And we were acting polite. Does this mean you're not contributing? But I mean, there were some reasonable people. Even somebody down at the studio who hadn't heard of our group wanted to get one of our T-shirts and join our group. So we have to remember when we get our name out there. Sometimes we hear some very visible negatives, but there are also people who are openly positive, and I think many more than we all realize, people who are quietly positive and feel good that we're around doing what we're doing.
We have time for 2 more questions. Ed's been waiting a long time, but first, is there anyone who hasn't yet asked a question? Shelley.
How many members are in your secular humanist group?
Well, we get a good number that come to meetings, maybe not as many as you, but usually we meet once a month with 30 to 40 people. We also, that's usually in a lecture type and discussion, and after we meet at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, and after that we go to dinner. Also, we have a monthly book discussion, which used to be at our house. Then I heard, actually, I don't know if you know Massimo Pigliucci, he at University of Tennessee. I gave a talk to his group there, and we saw that they actually met at a bookstore. So we decided to do the same, and we now meet at the Barnes & Noble bookstore in Charleston, where they publicize us in their newsletter. All the clubs, and some people joined our book discussion, then some did or didn't join our organization, but some are just curious and listen to us. So these different activities where we can be visible have helped our group enormously. And we don't have some of the strife that sometimes takes place in more liberal areas where, well, that's not the kind of atheist that I am, or atheist, humanist, secular humanist kind of stuff. We all feel so battered, and we all have so much in common that we're not worried so much about labels as, we basically agree and let's keep that 90% or more that we have in common and forget that other few percent.
Okay, Nicole, and then we'll cut it off, but Ed and everybody else, you guys are staying for lunch, right?
I'll talk to anybody anytime. I'm happy to talk more.
You say you are a Jew. What do you think a Jew is?
Well, the definition of a Jew is someone born of a Jewish mother. That's the Orthodox definition, and according to Hitler, I'm a Jew. So I don't want to deny that. I'm not a religious Jew, but I still consider myself a cultural Jew, where I most care about anti-Semitism. So just like there's prejudice against atheists, there's prejudice against Jews, and I want to not try to deny that kind of heritage, but stand up and say, you know, we don't have horns. You see, some people would think I'd have double horns, two for Jew, two for atheists. And I don't want to deny that. I'll be honest about my religious beliefs, and while I would like more religions to be less into the God part of it and more into the good works, which is why I'm even a member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which is basically atheist Jews.
Okay.